Hey, good morning, guys. It is March 27th, and Chambers is teaching out of Revelation 4. And it's John has been given the churches, or the letters to the churches, and then he is brought into the throne room of God. And the verse has in it, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." So he's being addressed by God to come, or by an angel, I guess. It says a voice of a trumpet, so it's probably an angel. That says, "Come up higher," and that's kind of the picture that Chambers is dealing with, the coming up higher. And it's interesting that he contrasts both temptation and holiness, or vision from God, this elevation. And if you look in the Old Testament, it's really interesting. Um, it's an interesting study in the Old Testament about the high places. Every time, if you read through the books of Kings and Chronicles, and every time you read about a a righteous king, or a good king, or one that tried to follow the law, often they they tear down the Asherah poles, tear down the altars, but you'll read again and again, but they left the high places. It's really interesting. The high places is a theme throughout the Old Testament. And it's not only the place where God takes people like Moses. He took Moses to a mountain. Every time he wanted to deal with Moses, give him the law, spend time with Moses. Even Elijah, we find Elijah in the mountains. Um, God takes people to a high place. And so it's interesting that Satan, being a counterfeiter, does the same thing for, there's something about high places, elevated places for mankind. You even see it when you visit mountainous areas. Finding an overlook where you can look down is a very, very popular spot. So we like to be in a high place. We feel closer to the divine. And so Satan does the same thing. Temptation does the same, kind of brings us higher. And Chambers even says that here. He says Satan uses the strategy of elevation and temptation, and God does the same, but the effect is different. So Satan brings us up in the high place. And the picture he paints is that as Satan brings us higher and higher into these new realms of temptation and sin, we feel like we're clinging, as you would on a mountain, like climbing Everest, for example, clinging to smaller and smaller handholds, kind of hanging on. And he says the opposite is true for God. As God brings us into the higher places, closer to his kind of his divine nature, he plants our feet on even a larger, what does he call it, like a tableland. Instead of finding a pinnacle to cling to, you find a great tableland where it's easy to move. So being brought up to the higher place with God is a very different experience. One of the things he does here, which is a challenge, he says, compare this week in your spiritual history to the same week last year, and see how God has called you up higher. And so that's a real challenge to us, is to compare your life today to a year ago or 10 years ago. And that's the reason why, by the way, I always encourage people to stay in fellowship with believers, with the same church, or the same study, the same people around you for years and years and years, is because we need to be able to look at each other and say, "Oh wow, you've really grown. There's been some things that I've seen that you used to struggle with, or that I used to see as weakness in your life, but that God has turned to strength." And so when you're constantly shifting around and changing the people with whom you spend time, you lose accountability. It is important to have some long-term accountability. That's why God built families. That's why families exist the way God did it. So the one thing that Chambers ends here with, this idea of not coming up higher, is when we're called to come up higher and we resist. God has to hide from us what he's doing until we get to the place where he can reveal it. And it's almost like, if you think about it literally, like coming up higher, what does it provide for us? Going to a higher place provides vision. We can see more. We can experience and see more of the landscape. And so God's truths, when he says come up higher, when God says, hey, come closer, come closer, come closer, it's so that we can look out and see more of what he's doing. And when we resist that, our vision is impaired. We can't, obviously standing in a 6 foot hole, especially for me because I'm 5'4", but standing in a 6 foot hole, I see nothing. But if I'm standing on a mountaintop, I see a lot. Anyway, the high places, that's a really interesting study, by the way. Go back and look in the Old Testament about high places, and see how much it comes up with the people of Israel and how often God called them to to sanctify themselves. And the very few kings, there's only a few that actually went up and tore down the high places, the altars in the high places. Anyway, you guys have an awesome day.